Hi, my name is Austin.
I'm Keegan.
Hi, I'm Cass. Oh no.
Justin.
And this is Genetically Modified Organisms.
Keegan, do you know what genetically modified organisms are?
Yeah. No.
Thought so. Hey, love heart, do you know what genetically modified organisms
No. What are genetically modified organisms?
Yes, what are genetically modified organisms?
Genetically modified organisms are organisms where scientists modify their genes.
For example, a South Korean scientist named
Li Tanghuang?
created a new GMO, square apples, because they're easier to store and they look more appealing to the human eye.
Scientists modify their genes to make it more convenient for the consumer. For example, would you rather have an ordinary fruit or a big, juicy fruit with no seeds?
The patterns of human geography affect the issue because when there's a higher population, there's a greater demand for genetically modified organisms, thus increasing the issue. In different countries, there's a greater demand for different nutrients that are not available in the country's native foods. So in order to give the country's population proper nutrients, scientists genetically modify organisms to change the nutritional content in the food. For example, in the United States, scientists modify chickens to make them larger so they can get better quality and a greater quantity of products.
You're reading like the whole entire
I
Genetically modified organisms is a large demand for certain nutrients in certain countries. The effect they have around the world is that when scientists experiment on organisms, many die in the process. Also, the consequences of consuming the genetically modified organisms are unknown, and they can be very dangerous in the long term. Another effect they have on the world is that organisms that are not genetically modified are beginning to become extinct as the genetically modified organisms take over. In 2007, rats were fed Monsanto's MON 863 calm for 90 days and began to show signs of toxicity in their liver and kidneys.
In 1999, Dr. S. colleagues used green fluorescent protein from a jellyfish and produced it with a zebrafish to create glowfish. This definitely killed all the jellyfish, but the long-term effects on the zebrafish are unknown.
Even though we don't know the consequences of injecting fluorescent protein into the zebrafish, what we do know is that a benefit of it is when there's higher levels of pollution in the water, the zebrafish go a lot brighter.
Genetically modified organisms are bad because they're unnatural and we don't know what we're putting into our bodies and what effect it will have on us long term or short term. Also, they're bad because when scientists modify the organisms, they could be harming the process.
GMOs are very good for our economy. They bring in a lot of revenue for our economic base.
The solution to the issue of GMOs is to stop abusing them to fit our needs. This is an easy thing to do for a short period of time, simply stop genetically modifying organisms to fit our needs. But over a long period of time, this solution may not be viable since most people use GMOs every day.
True.
Dr. Seralini and Dr. Antonio discovered that GMOs cause numerous health problems, including birth defects, cancer, neurologic imbalances, embryonic deaths, DNA damage, and fetal death.
In conclusion, this is why GMOs are a very underrated environmental problem. Animals are being harmed and we are putting stuff into our body that we didn't even know was there. Many health risks come from this, yet we still continue to use these genetically modified organisms every day. GMOs are a problem that should be stopped, though there are not a whole lot of solutions. The few that we stated are very effective to stopping the issue.
David Suzuki joins me in the studio. I want to ask you first, you've described our consumption of genetically modified food as a massive experiment. That's what science is about, experiments. What's your primary concern about this one?
Well, the point I make is that we have no idea what the long-term consequences of these genetic manipulations will be on the public. There is no way that our health authorities can test all possible combinations and permutations over a large enough population over a long enough period to be able to say with a surety that they're harmless. So basically, by slipping it into our food without our knowledge, without any indication that there are genetically modified organisms in our food, we are now unwittingly part of a massive experiment. Over years, as thousands and thousands of people continue to consume this, we will provide the data which will allow us ultimately to conclude whether or not there's any danger.
In approving the foods that it has, Health Canada says that they've looked for toxins and allergens, but that essentially at the end of it, a potato is a potato, and if it doesn't have either one of those things in it, it's safe.
Yes.
Why isn't it?
Well, essentially, the U.S. FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has said that genetically modified organisms or food are basically not much different from regular food, and so they'll be treated in the same way. The problem is this. Geneticists follow the inheritance of genes in what we call a vertical fashion. You breed a male and a female, you follow their offspring, you breed them, you follow it on down, within a species. What biotechnology allows us to do is to take genes from this organism and move it, what we call horizontally, into a totally unrelated species. Now, David Suzuki doesn't normally mate with a carrot plant and exchange genes. What biotechnology allows us to do is to switch genes from one to the other without regard to the biological constraints.
Now, I mean, you're a geneticist. You know this field better than,
Right.
than any of us. Why is that of particular concern?
Well, the problem is this. You see, it's very, very bad science. We assume that the principles governing the inheritance of genes vertically applies when you move genes laterally or horizontally. There's absolutely no reason to make that conclusion. We've got to do much more experimentation.
And yet we're dealing with such small bits.
Oh, sure. But one of those small bits can determine the difference between whether you're, in a human being, a mutation can determine whether you're crippled or you die. I mean, because they're tiny, a tiny part of it doesn't mean they are not potent. And the point is, when you move a gene, one tiny gene, as you say, out of this organism into a different one, you change completely its context. And there is no way at the present time that we can predict how that's going to behave and what the outcome will be. We think that we're designing these life forms, but it's like taking the Toronto Symphony Orchestra prepared to play a Beethoven symphony. And then you take some taiko drummers over here and you flip them over in with the Toronto Symphony and you say, play music. Well, what comes out is going to be something very, very different from either the taiko drums by themselves or the symphony.
Presumably this science is well motivated. They're doing this for the right reasons, whether they say it's to reduce the use of pesticides, to be able to improve crop yields, to be able to, I suppose, fight pests and bugs in our foods in other ways. What's the answer? I mean,
well, that's what the publicists say, is that it's being driven for all of these good things. The fact of the matter is it's being driven by money. Tremendous amount of money, speculative money, invested in biotech companies now, and so there's a tremendous amount of pressure to realize some kind of income on that investment so you can have some real economic exchange here. So it's money that's driving it. You know, they say that it's to help deal with the huge population growth. Well, Wolfenson, the president of the World Bank, says that 1.3 billion human beings live on less than $1 a day. 3 billion people, half the human population, lives on less than $3 a day. Do you think they're going to be able to afford the very expensive genetically engineered foods? A great deal, more than half of the products, say, of Monsanto, are seeds that are generated not to produce more nourishment or to be better tasting, but to allow these plants to be drenched with Monsanto pesticides. Normally, those pesticides would kill the grain or the crop, but now they've engineered them to be resistant to those, and they demand to have the Monsanto product put on them. So it's a business excuse. It has nothing to do with improving the quality of life on Earth.
So what should consumers do? What do you do?
Well, I personally think it's too late to put the genie back in the bottle. It's already on us. And so to demand that a stop to all of this and a moratorium be held is really pretty unrealistic. At the very least, in a democratic society, in a civil society, we as consumers ought to be given the choice whether we do or do not want to become part of this massive experiment. So at the very least, surely you could put on the label whether or not there are genetically modified organisms in it.
Has it changed the way you eat?
Definitely. Well, I mean, I've never gone for eating GMOs. I'm alarmed because so much of it has been slipped into our food without any public discussion or awareness. And it's not just in the food you and I eat. Our children are getting it in the various children's foods. And now I see there's a move for Gerber's and Heinz to get away from GMOs in children's foods. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. We've never been given the choice. Now I say it's time at least to give us that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Little to no long-term solutions to getting rid of